Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta government announced new funding measures to help make life more affordable for post-secondary students. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's in the Bahamas, but not on a vacation. We will explain the purpose of his visit. And we hear from a European and history professor in Alberta who explains why he believes Ukraine will never surrender in its war with Russia.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Former Deputy Commissioner and Public Safety Analyst Pierre-Yves Bourdois discussed Brenda Lucky's decision to step down as Canada's top Mountie. Lucky announced that her last day as RCMP Commissioner will be March 17th. He says what may have led to her decision to step down was when she admitted to not having a solid plan in place to deal with the Freedom Convoy, which ascended upon Ottawa last winter.
She failed at the time, at what she admitted, to actually raise the issue of having an operational plan ready when they were discussing the Emergency Measures Act, and that certainly didn't shine a positive light on her leadership, especially around cabinet and minister. And as a result of this particular testimonies, there were calls both at the federal and even at the provincial level, thinking of the Solicitor General out of Alberta, that actually called for her resignation.
Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping says the province will invest more into our health workforce to address a number of health workforce challenges. That includes $158 million in Budget 2023 to ensure Alberta has the medical professionals needed now and into the future.
Some investments would include $90 million to strengthen programs to attract and retain rural physicians, $29 million to fulfill the government's commitment in the agreement signed with the Alberta Medical Association that specifically focuses on underserviced rural and remote communities, $7 million for the targeted recruitment of 500 internationally trained nurses from the United States and the United Kingdom, and $1 million to fund the Provincial Nurse Navigator program, which support all nurses immigrating to Alberta.
The Vice President of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees responded to Minister Copping's announcement from earlier today. Bobby Joe Boroday says what the province was proposing on Thursday was really lacking in details.
Most notably, what we thought was lacking was any benchmarks or targets. So when you don't know what it is you are ultimately trying to achieve, it's hard to say if that's actually enough money or not. What we really were hoping to hear, or at least see in this announcement, was a commitment to how they were going to deal with the crisis today. While it's appreciated and, we need to see more investment in education and training, more seats, a change to the immigration policy so that we can get folks working in the field faster, all of those initiatives are actually going to take time. And we've been in crisis for quite some time now, and we need help right now. So ideally, a proposal that had some measures in it that will help our folks who are working on the front lines right now is what we would like to see.
The AUP represents around 100,000 workers, including more than 62,000 in the healthcare industry. Joseph Scow, the MLA for Cardston-Siksika and Alberta Government House Leader for the UCP, spoke about the upcoming 2023 budget. Scow said there were close to 94,000 full-time jobs created in our province during 2022. And we asked Scow, outside of employment issues, what were some of the other main concerns facing residents in his riding?
The main issues I'm hearing is definitely the cost of living, the economy, and access to health care. And as a government, we are laser focused on addressing those issues. Families with children under 18, seniors, and others are receiving benefits now. They've applied for them, and they're receiving payments going out now to $100 a month for those relief payments. We're also suspending the fuel tax, rebates on natural gas and utilities, everything all the way to insurance.
The 2023 Alberta budget will be released on February 28th. And by the way, the provincial election is taking place on May the 29th. The province also announced measures to help make life more affordable for post-secondary students. Minister of Advanced Education Dimitrios Nicolaides says these new initiatives will help all students deal with higher costs during these challenging times of high inflation. The new measures include capping domestic tuition increases at 2%, reducing interest rates on student loans to the prime rate, doubling the student loan interest-free grace period from 6 to 12 months, and increasing the repayment assistance plan from $25,000 to $40,000, allowing more students to benefit from the program. Some post-secondary students are applauding the government's announcement.
But with the rising cost of living and higher tuition, working just one job or working part-time throughout the school year is barely enough to get me by. That's why I am so glad that the Alberta government is introducing new affordability measures and that will positively impact students across all of Alberta. These changes will benefit thousands of students, and I look forward for benefiting on the extended grace period when I graduate in 2024. It also puts my mind at ease knowing that when the grace period finishes, I will pay less interest in the long run with my student loans as I begin a new career in marketing.
Officials say the province will also increase the Alberta student grant by $225 per month during the 2022 to 2023 loan year. The government of Alberta revealed the top baby names for 2022. And once again, Olivia was the top girl's name in our province for newborns, and for boys, it was Noah. Noah's been the most popular boy's name for 4 years in a row. Liam, Theodore, Oliver, and Jack joined Noah in the top 5, while Sophia, Emma, Amelia, and Harper rounded out the top 5 for girls. Officials say there were 48,225 births registered in Alberta last year. Some of the more unique names on record last year included Brooklyn, Apollo, Willow, and Huxley. Also Winter, Storm, Beckham, and Maverick. You know, the Bible says that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made. There are a number of holistic-minded people who believe that given the right building blocks, our bodies can heal themselves. Nutritionist Josie Bosgra says that our bodies will provide signals to communicate what important nutrients we may be missing from our diets.
Whether it's fingernails or hair or skin or lots of other things we could talk about, those are the top 3 that came to my head. But these are very tangible markers if you let them be. I think lots of people don't have the awareness to say, my nails are more brittle than they were last year, what's going on? So in that case, it could be actually connected to your hair too. If you're depleted in minerals, for example, that can change things. If you're not taking in adequate protein, every cell needs protein to do its job.
Make sure you catch the full interview with nutritionist Josie Bosgra and producer Michael Clausen coming up later in our program. A new report on wildlife attacks in Canada suggests the most dangerous animal in Alberta does not have sharp teeth and claws, but instead has antlers and hooves. The findings say elk are the most dangerous. The study published by Sportingpedia explored data collected on human-wildlife incidents in national parks between 2010 and 2021. Out of the 3,726 wildlife attacks during that 11-year period, close to 2,300 of them involved elk. Second were grizzly bear attacks at 431, and third, black bear attacks at 243. There's recently been a large increase in dead waterfowl in the city of Lethbridge. This includes areas near Henderson Lake and in the river bottom by the high-level bridge. Dr. Everett Hanna, an instructor at the School of Environmental Sciences at Lethbridge College, explained what he thinks may be killing off so many of the birds.
I would say across the board, there's many reasons potentially, but likely the highest probability cause, especially with geese right now, is highly pathogenic avian influenza. There's an outbreak of the H5N1 strain currently underway. We might be a bit on the tail end of the spike, though if it gets cold again, it's likely to sort of reemerge. There are other diseases in previous years that we've tracked with the city and some other authorities that sort of monitor wildlife health, such as aspergillosis, which is a fungal infection in the respiratory system of birds. So, I don't want to say it's H5N1 across the board, but better than not, the chances with geese especially that it is.
Hanna says there's potential for avian influenza to affect humans. He also mentioned that there have been cases of the flu hitting mammals like black bears, foxes, and skunks. He says if you see a dead bird, not to touch it with your bare hands as to avoid the risk of transmission. Well, it was day 2 of the Farming Smarter Conference and Trade Show here in Lethbridge. Many guest speakers took part in the 2-day event, including Graham Collier from New Farm Canada. Collier spent part of the day talking about ultra-early seeding spring wheat. He explains how this new system is different than a traditional way to seed.
It's a little bit of a mind shift and a mentality change, because traditionally we look at a calendar date for when to go seed, but this system is based on using a soil temperature. So if you think of a calendar date and the time of year and the season, what it's looking like, if you seed on that same calendar date every year, you're seeding at a different point in that growing season every year. If you seed based on a soil temperature trigger, you're going to change your date that you're seeding within the year, but you're going to seed at the same time within the growing season.
Collier says the next conference takes place next year, and it's a great way to provide outreach to farmers. This year's conference wrapped up on Thursday afternoon. Well, it was nice to be on the plus side of things weather-wise once again today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the mild temperatures should remain for the rest of the week. Even the overnight lows are not that bad.
Yeah, not as bad as they could be, that's for sure, Hal. And speaking of which, overnight low this evening, -2 with west wind gusting to 60 kilometers per hour. As we get into Friday already, a mix of sun and cloud, high of 4 degrees, and we're still seeing that westerly wind at 40 k, gusting up to 60 kilometers per hour. Friday night, overnight low, a -2. Before we head into the long weekend, and Hal, I will be back later in the show to give you that weekend forecast.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jeanette. In alliance with Pink Shirt Day next week, a junior high school in our city held a fun activity for its grade 9 students to help promote mental health and wellness in the school. Angela Stewart was there and spoke with one student who says it's very important to be involved to help reduce the stigma of mental health.
Kindness. It was a fashionable yet strong message ever so present at Father Leonard Van Tigham's school Thursday afternoon.
We thought we'd set this up for just kind of a fun, engaging activity for the junior high students to participate in.
An afternoon lunch photo booth gave the grade 9 students an opportunity to dress up and have their snapshot taken to raise awareness for such an important topic.
I think it's very important that we get involved in this kind of stuff, because bullying is a very big problem with youth and in schools especially.
In conjunction with Pink Shirt Day on February 22nd, the activity was also to help promote the school's Headstrong program, a national evidence-based mental health leadership program for youth.
I think it's immensely important. I think there's so many different ways to engage with topics around mental health, and usually when we think of mental health, we think of some of those tougher things, and I think for students to be able to talk about this stuff in more of a positive light, I think is very helpful.
It's good that they know that they feel safe and accepted, and that we're here for them.
With so much negativity in our world at times and in schools, Reese Cordes, a wellness coach with the Holy Spirit Catholic School Division, believes the more supports for students, the better, which is why programs and activities like this one are so vital.
It's been really great to see the support increasing in the last few years, for sure.
Try and prevent the stigma of mental health and mental illness.
For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Additional funding for Streets Alive mission and its outreach programming may be made available fairly soon. Members of the cultural SBC met on Thursday to figure out if more money should be divvied out to the Christian organization. Officials with the city told us what the funds would go toward should it be approved.
Admin expenses, wages and benefits, project delivery expenses, direct client expenses. The total budget for the term that we're looking at, which would be a 13-month term to start, would be just under $400,000, which would actually be $368,920 on an annual basis. The activities that would be included in the agreement are primarily directed towards outreach to encampments within the city, since we've seen that as a primary concern that's coming forward.
Members of the cultural SBC voted to bring forward the funding proposal to council at a later date. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in the Bahamas for the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community. The PM's visit comes as CARICOM celebrates its 50th anniversary. Prime Minister Trudeau says Canada needs to stand with the people of Haiti to find solutions against the violence in that country and to help bring stability to the region.
Right now, Haiti is confronted with unrelenting gang violence, political turmoil, and corruption. Armed groups are committing murder, rape, and other gender-based violence, kidnapping innocent people and recruiting children to terrorize and subjugate people. It hits close to home not only in the region, but also in Canada with our strong Haitian diaspora community. Prime Minister Henry is here with us as a leader of a CARICOM member state. Now is the moment to come together to confront the severity of this situation.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh outlined his party's Opposition Day motion, calling on the federal government to ensure healthcare funding goes towards protecting and improving the public system.
New Democrats believe that everyone in our country should have access to excellent quality, the highest quality healthcare. That means no one should have to worry about having to raise money through a GoFundMe to pay for an operation. That means people shouldn't have to wait for hours and hours in an emergency room to get care. And it means that no one should have to pay $70 enriching Galen Weston and Maple just to see a family doctor. But sadly, that is the reality that we're up against. And in particular, the increase of for-profit delivery of care means that the situation is even getting worse. It means that healthcare workers nurses and healthcare workers in hospitals, emergency rooms are being poached, are being stolen to go to the for-profit clinics. And that means the wait times are getting even longer. It means things are even worse.
You know, it's been a whole year since Russian forces invaded Ukraine. The war may not end anytime soon. That's according to David Marples, professor of Russian and East European history at the University of Alberta. Marples says the support Ukraine is receiving from NATO nations has given them more leverage, making it highly unlikely that Ukraine would surrender to Russia.
I don't think Ukraine will capitulate to Russia. I think Ukraine will keep fighting as long as it can keep fighting. And that may be for a long, long time. I think Ukraine has the numbers and the support it's getting from the Western countries would be enough to keep the Ukrainians in the field for many years, actually.
U of A professor David Marples will have more on the war in Ukraine with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. Well, we were well above the freezing mark once again today. Unfortunately, the mild temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta will remain with us this week. Full weather details are coming up. You know, if you want to wash your vehicle in Lethbridge, now may be a very good time. It's above zero during the day with no snow or rain in the forecast for at least a few more days. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the mild temperatures should remain until next week when Old Man Winter will be paying us a visit once again?
Yes, and it will be visiting us with a vengeance, Hal, beginning on Monday, which of course is Family Day. Of course, the long weekend, and we are looking at a fairly decent long weekend up until Monday, that is. So into tomorrow, we are looking at a high of 4 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. Into Saturday, partly cloudy skies as well, high of 3, all the way up to 6 degrees on Sunday with mainly sunny skies. So it's going to be a lovely one. And then there's Monday, which is Family Day here in Alberta. 7 degrees the high, which isn't bad, but we are looking at a mix of showers with some flurries. As we get into Monday night, we're going to be seeing periods of snow, periods of light snow as well on Tuesday with a high of -14. So that temperature is going to be dropping fairly fast. Wednesday, we're looking at a high of only -21 and a 60% chance of flurries. So Old Man Winter certainly returning to us. Spring is not quite here yet. 2 degrees the average high for this time of year, -10 the average low. 14 was our high temperature on this day, and that happened in 2002. In 1938 was our chilliest day on record, which was -35. 7:40, that's when the sun rose this morning, and our sun set this evening at 5:51 p.m. We are now at 10 hours and 11 minutes of daylight. As we look to the west coast, a bit of a windy one in the Juan-de-Fuca Strait, but Victoria seeing a high of 8 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. Vancouver seeing a high of 7. Vancouver also seeing some showers mixed with some wet flurries. Edmonton seeing a 30% chance of flurries tomorrow with a high of 1 degree, and a 1 degree high in Calgary as well tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. We're going to feel a little bit chillier with that wind chill though. As we look to the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon seeing a -3 as a high and a chance of flurries there. 30% chance of flurries in Regina tomorrow, -2 the high there, and a high of 0 in Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing some blowing snow too along the outlying areas, and of course that 30% chance of flurries. Now as we look to Toronto, we are seeing some warnings in effect. We're going to be seeing a mix of wintry precipitation. We're going to be seeing some freezing rain, some snow, and some ice pellets in Toronto. -4 the high there, -7 the high in Ottawa. Ottawa seeing also some flurries, and 5 centimeters of snow expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of -3. As we look to Atlantic Canada, 15 to 25 centimeters of snow and ice pellets and freezing rain expected tomorrow in Fredericton. That's all beginning tonight as well. -3 the high there, 6 degrees the high in Halifax. Halifax seeing a rainfall warning this evening, another 10 millimeters of rain tomorrow. So -3 the high in Charlottetown. Charlottetown looking at some flurries as well. And then showers ending by tomorrow evening in St. John's, Newfoundland, 3 degrees the high there. So lots happening in central and eastern Canada tomorrow. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says the Canadian economy is overheated and the labour market is too tight despite higher interest rates. Macklem says the excess demand in the economy continues to put pressure on prices. He added that the effects of higher interest rates really need to work through the economy and restrain spending enough for supply to catch up in order for inflation to fall back to 2%.
Inflation is turning the corner. We are very conscious we still have a long way to go, but we are seeing the interest rate increases we've already put in place working their way through the economy. We expect they will continue to work through their economy. Our forecast is that inflation actually by the middle, around the middle of this year, will be about 3%.
The central bank announced last month that it would temporarily pause interest rate hikes, but Macklem stressed that he's ready to raise rates further if inflation continues to rise. A new report by ratehub.ca says home affordability eroded in most major cities across Canada despite a drop in prices last month. The report says Canadians in 9 of 10 major cities said their income is not high enough to qualify for a mortgage. Hamilton, Ontario was the only city that saw a slight improvement, while Victoria, British Columbia was one of the most unaffordable. RateHub says home prices are down compared with last year, but that has been offset by much higher mortgage rates. Canadian Tire capped its centennial year with gains in both its profits and sales. The retailer says it earned net income attributable to shareholders of $531.9 million in the fourth quarter. That is up from $508.5 million from a year ago. Revenue increased from $5.14 to $5.34 billion in the same quarter in 2021. The company says its normalized profit for the quarter was $9.34 per diluted share. That is higher than the $7.44 per share analysts were expecting. Cenovus is reporting a fourth quarter profit of $784 million. Now that compares with a loss of $408 million a year ago. Revenue increased from $13.7 to $14.1 billion in the quarter. The Calgary-based oil and gas producer also announced a change in the executive suites that will take place following its annual meeting set for April the 26th. It says Chief Operating Officer John McKenzie will become the Chief Executive, while current CEO Alex Porbay will become the Executive Chair. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 113 points on the day to finish at 20,606. The Dow was down 431 points to 33,696. The S&P 500 was down 57 on the day to 4,090, and the Nasdaq was down 214 points to 11,855. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 10 cents to $78.49 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 8 cents to $2.39 US. Gold was down 2 cents to $18.3635 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $21.58 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12 per bushel, barley's at $9.08, canola's at $18.66, and corn is at $11.28 per bushel. Live cattle were up 23 cents to $162.78. Feeder cattle March contract was down $1.10 to $186.23, and lean hogs April contract was down 73 cents to $85.78. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.35 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping says the province will invest more into our health workforce to address a number of health workforce challenges. He says that includes $158 million in Budget 2023 to ensure Alberta has the medical professionals needed now and into the future. The AUPE, meanwhile, which represents 62,000 healthcare workers, says Thursday's announcement was really lacking in details. An Alberta University professor says he doubts Ukraine would ever surrender in its war with Russia. David Marples from the University of Alberta will have more details for us shortly. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, Be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge City Council wants to hear from you. The city is exploring the option of harmonizing speed limits in both playground and school zones. During this process, community feedback is being collected to help inform City Council's decision. Lethbridge residents are encouraged to learn more about this proposal and provide their feedback through an online survey which will be open until February 19th. You can find the survey at getinvolvedlethbridge.ca/harmonized playground zones. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 7 p.m. with a large group session, followed by small groups at 8 with coffee and dessert at 9. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca or call Park Meadows Church office at 403-327-4422. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
David Marples is a distinguished university professor of Russian and East European history at the Department of History and Classics at the University of Alberta. And Professor Marples joins me once again from Edmonton to discuss his perspective on the most recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine. David, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so David, last time we spoke, I asked you how long you thought this conflict between Russia and Ukraine would last, and you indicated that it could go on for quite a while. And well, here it is, a year later, and they're still at it. David, do you see this conflict waning anytime soon, or is this something that could continue to go on for several more years?
I'm not sure about years, but it certainly could go on for many months. And both sides are gearing up for new offensives, particularly the Russian side, but both sides actually. And I can see over the next weeks more escalation, particularly in the Donbass and perhaps in the south as well, and maybe even a thrust or two in the north towards the major cities of Kharkiv and Kiev on the part of the Russians. They've indicated this, and I've seen, for example, the president of Chechnya has also advocated that Russia must take cities like Kharkiv and Odessa if he wants to win this war. And it's a tough task, and it's not something that they're likely to achieve, I think. But nevertheless, that's the ambition that they have right now.
Yeah. Would this be this Russian surge that we're hearing about towards the latter part of February?
Yeah. I mean, they're prepared, it seems, to lose a lot of troops in order to make advances. And I read in one report that they're losing perhaps 800 soldiers per day so far in this month, which is more than at any time during the war previously. And it's also more troops are being deployed than ever before as well. Having said that, Russia's not yet on a full war footing. It still calls this a special operation. And it's called up another 300,000 or so troops, which is much more than it had initially at the start of the war, when it started with about 130,000 troops. But it's by no means all the Russian army. They've not done a full call-up of all the people who would be eligible to be called up if necessary.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we have Western countries and NATO countries that have now promised tanks and different type of artillery. So do you think that this would help Ukraine at all, or is it going to be too late?
It's a good question. I mean, it depends really how quickly Ukrainian technicians and troops can be trained in order to use this equipment. And right now you have Ukrainian soldiers being trained in this country, in Canada, in Germany, in the United States, in the UK, just to use the weapons that they've been allocated. So this may be a factor, in fact, in Russia's thinking, that they want to have a major offensive before these weapons come into play and make as much progress as possible before that situation may turn with the new weapons, because some of them may be quite decisive, I think, in stopping a Russian offensive or promoting a Ukrainian offensive with the use of say, the tanks that they're being given from Germany and other countries, United States as well.
How much longer do you see before there could be a Ukrainian capitulation to Russia?
I don't think Ukraine will capitulate to Russia. I think Ukraine will keep fighting as long as it can keep fighting. And that may be for a long, long time. I think Ukraine has the numbers and the support it's getting from the Western countries would be enough to keep the Ukrainians in the field for many years, actually. Russia could make sort of, let's say, Russia could likely to take the whole of the Donbass. That is a possibility. In other words, they could capture the city of Bakhmut, which they laid under siege last September. They're still trying to occupy it fully. And they could move on a major city such as Slavyansk in the west, which used to be, in 2014, the capital of the separatist forces when the war first started. And that is a target for them, to capture all of those two regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Luhansk, they've already taken all of it, but Donetsk, there's certain holdouts of cities as well. But I think Ukraine could do a counterattack, say towards Melitopol, further to the south, that would break the Russian connections with Crimea, and that would put Russia in a very vulnerable position in the south. So there are a number of developments that could take place. It's hard to know exactly what both sides are thinking.
So from your background as a historian, can you maybe explain why this conflict, why does it matter so much to Vladimir Putin and the Russian nation, this particular conflict right now?
Well, Russia, and particularly Putin, subscribes to a historical narrative that sees Kiev as a founding state of the Russian state of Muscovy. That the Kievan state in the 10th century that adopted Christianity in 988 was actually the founding principality of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, that the three East Slavic nations arose from that, and that history afterwards is always based on that interpretation, that the three states are actually one people, one culture, and one religion, for example, the Russian Orthodox Church. So Putin and others have never really accepted that Ukraine could be independent from Russia. They see Ukraine as a part of Russia. If you like, as a little brother. They were known as the little brother during the Soviet period. And Little Russians is another word that the Russian state has used for Ukraine as well. So I think for Putin, it's a kind of blind spot. He cannot accept the idea that Ukraine is a sovereign state with its independence and wishes to go towards the West, wishes to move to the European Union, join NATO now. Quite clearly, Ukrainians want to join NATO now, and therefore has tried to stop it in every way possible. But in the way he's done it is, in fact, served to unify Ukraine as never before, and all the regional divides that we've seen over the past 30 years seem to have evaporated, and now Ukrainians are quite intent on removing Russians from their territory and keeping their own state intact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing also about Transnistria and Moldova. So do you think that these territories will reconnect with Russia after this conflict is completed?
Moldova is a sensitive region, and Transnistria has existed now for 30 years as an independent state that's really recognized by very few states of the world, but has its own government. And the government there kind of looks back to the Soviet period as its ideal. I mean, it has almost a Soviet flag, it uses Soviet symbols. They never really seem to have moved on from that. But nevertheless, they broke away from Moldova, and there's no real opportunity for Moldova to retake it. So I think the rest of Moldova at the moment, I don't think is on the immediate horizon of Russia as long as this war in Ukraine continues. I would say probably more vulnerable are the two breakaway states of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which broke away in 2008 with Russian support, and which Georgia has basically lost control over. They're not fully independent yet, and they're not attached to Russia at the moment, but they could be. And this is the sort of place that they might look if they wanted to expand further. But I don't see these regions as important as Ukraine and Belarus. And with Belarus, you probably know, Russian the Russian army has about 15,000 troops there now, which is more than they had at the start of the war last year. And the question is, why? Why would they need so many troops up there? And where is this going? What are they going to do? And there was some speculation that the Belarusian army would also join in the war. But so far that's not happened, and I don't think it will happen because the leadership of Belarus, which came in, which retained power in 2020 despite mass protests, that leadership realizes that the Belarusian population does not want to join in the war in Ukraine. So in all these areas, there's a lot of tension now. And even in the NATO countries like the Baltic states, they're very concerned about what Russia might do.
And of course, there's been a little bit of rhetoric about the globalist aligned governments wanting to weaken Russia and then move on to China in 2024. Do you feel that the European nations can maintain this push along with the U.S. to continue to see Ukraine as a proxy in this war against Russia?
Well, I mean, I think the United States is not fully committed to doing anything more than push the Russians out of Ukraine. I mean, it's not attempting to threaten Russia in any way, and it's not using, let's say, planes and other weapons that could actually bomb Russian cities. There's no thought of that. There's no real intention to build up this into a major world war. But on the other side of Russia, China has been backing Russia so far, but at the same time, you see some reticence on the part of the Chinese as to how long this war can keep going and how long they should support Russia if the war turns out to be a very long one, because China's a trading nation and it cannot really commit itself long-term to a major war in the center of Europe, which is basically where Ukraine is. There may be a possibility, in my view, of some kind of agreement or rapprochement between the United States and China. I mean, obviously now with the balloons being shot down and Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last year, they didn't help at all. But they've not entirely stopped discussions between Washington and Beijing. And I see them as possibly continuing. Because if China could at least be neutral, then the Russian regime that's in power now would lose a huge base of support and a recipient for its oil and gas now that the Europeans have basically cut off oil and intend to cut off gas supplies as well. So I think that would be really my strategy if I was the president of the United States. I think that is where I would look to China, not as an enemy, but as some country that could actually be brought on board, at least in the short term, to put pressure on Russia. Because otherwise, if Putin has Beijing behind him, he could continue indefinitely.
From your perspective as a historian, how do you see this conflict playing out?
It's very hard to say because much depends on the will of the Western powers to keep supporting Ukraine and how long it can continue. I mean, for example, in 2024, there'll be a new presidential election in the United States. And should, for example, a Republican take over, be it Trump or someone with the same sort of views as Trump, the United States support for Ukraine might diminish. I mean, it might stop altogether. Trump has never given any support to Ukraine, and I don't think he would if he came back into power. If the Democrats get another term, Biden stands again and gets another term, for example, then I think the United States would still commit itself to the war. Britain would join in. Most of the European Union would as well. But even in the European Union, there's some sort of dissent. I mean, the Italian foreign minister was in Minsk today for discussions, even though Belarus is supposed to be cut off from all contact with the European Union. And the question is, will he now go to Moscow and start talking to Putin as well? I don't know. But both Italy and Hungary have sort of formed some kind of dissension within the European Union on the unified policy towards Russia's war in Ukraine. And that's a dangerous sign. So I think everything has to stay in place, and there has to be strong commitment in order to keep Ukraine's military fighting in the longer term.
Yeah. It looks like we are out of time, but David Marple is professor of Russian and East European history at the University of Alberta. Thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Yes, my pleasure.
We wanted to have nutrition consultant Josie Bhaskara back with us to talk about the numerous physical and mental benefits attributed to eating well. Now, in our last talk with Josie, we discussed a variety of topics, but today we want to take a deep dive into the various body systems that benefit from eating clean and healthy. Josie, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. Josie, would you say that our food and lifestyle will affect every part of our life, from having migraines, food cravings, and maybe fertility and gut health as well?
Absolutely, I would. Food and lifestyle both are very, very important when we talk about exercise and rest and all that. My scope is food, and I would absolutely say that food, either what we're eating that isn't working for us or what we're not eating that we're lacking, will affect pretty much every part of us, every cell of our body, and come out in some sort of adverse feeling.
So I was going to ask you to give us some examples of food that might be affecting or causing migraines, for example. But I wanted to give an example from my younger days. I would eat a lot of alfalfa sprouts, and I started getting migraine headaches, which was really unusual for me. I cut out the alfalfa sprouts, migraines went away. Can you talk about this relationship?
Absolutely. I think it's super just important to start with every body is different. So while one person might do fine with, say, alfalfa sprouts and consider it a healthy thing for them, someone else might not. An interesting thing would be blood type. Blood type actually plays a factor in kind of what foods jive with you and what don't. So we could talk more about that, but essentially, like, say type O's, they do best with meat, they do best with red meat, they do not do well with like legumes and grains and stuff. So if a type O tried to be a vegetarian and they start getting a bunch of migraines because they're eating all these things that don't jive with their blood type, then that would be an example of how then you see a type A person who would thrive on those foods, and these two people are eating the exact same thing. One person's getting migraines, one person's not. So that would be one thing. Secondly, too much of anything is not ideal and can cause some sort of response like a migraine. So like in your example, we don't know, maybe your body didn't jive with alfalfa sprouts, but maybe you just ate too much. And so that's something to consider. For example, coffee in itself, I think it has a bit of a bad rap for, say, causing headaches or energy crashes. And while that's true, I think that's largely due to the overconsumption and reliance on it in our part of the world today.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of jumping off points. We'll get into the blood types and all of that stuff in a few minutes just to tease that. But when we consider how our bodies are designed, they're designed for food and maybe not the chemicals we see in modern foods. I know when everyone goes to the grocery store, we see so much food in boxes and bags. Can you talk maybe a little bit about how these modern foods have a negative impact on our bodies?
Absolutely. I think in part it's due to what you touched on with added chemicals and their byproducts, things that we weren't naturally designed to consume. The other thing I would say is we weren't really designed to eat food out of boxes and microwaves and all that jazz. So I think there's something to be said for whole foods and eating foods in their most natural form as possible. And then there's something to be said for these modern foods you're talking about, packaged, processed foods. And in small amounts, I think it's okay to some degree. Our bodies were designed with a detoxification system with your liver, which performs a ridiculous amount of functions per day to help you clear these things out. The problem is when we overconsume these things, when we're having boxed foods, canned foods, microwave meals every day. yeah. So I think the problem is that we're ingesting way more of this than we were designed to.
So our bodies, I think we would both agree that our bodies is made to heal itself, but it also communicates with us. So somebody might be getting inflammation. Maybe they've noticed that their fingernails are a little more brittle than normal, or that they used to be. Can you talk about those indicators that our body is trying to tell us something with?
Absolutely. Whether it's fingernails or hair or skin, or lots of other things we could talk about. Those are the top three that came to my head. But these are very like tangible markers if you let them be. I think lots of people don't. They don't have the awareness to say, my nails are more brittle than they were last year. What's going on? So in that case, like it could be actually connected to your hair too. Like if you're depleted in minerals, for example, that can change things. If you're not taking in adequate protein, every cell needs protein to do its job. So that would be one reason. Your fingernails in particular, if you got a white spot in the middle, that can indicate zinc deficiency. And as I said, if we can develop and cultivate an awareness of our bodies and changes in our bodies, we can catch things earlier. So zinc deficiency, if I see someone coming in with nails like that, we get them on a zinc supplement. We talk about zinc-rich foods, incorporating those, and then we can kind of bite it in the butt before it gets to a place where it's a lot more difficult to pull yourself out of a deep deficiency.
Right. And just as the Bible says, our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made. Getting to the blood types that we talked about, one of the things that I know that you do is the live blood analysis. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what its purpose is?
Absolutely. Yep. This right here is my handy dandy microscope. You can just see the tip of it. And so when people come to see me, we take a prick of blood from their finger and we grab it onto a slide without destroying any integrity of the cells. So we actually see their cells on the computer screen as if they were moving around in the body. That can tell us so much based on the shape, based on how they're interacting with each other, based on what's happening in the background between the cells. We can see deficiencies. We can see, say, zinc deficiency, B12, iron deficiency. We can see chemical toxicity, adrenal stress. We can see different white blood cells that might indicate, say, like a food allergy or parasite infection. Can see if your liver's stressed. We can see how you're digesting fats and proteins. There is so much more I could say, but it really is a deep dive into like, how is your body doing on a cellular level? And I just love that we have this technology to do that. And typically when people come in for the first time, they're also in awe of those are my blood cells. Wow. And what does that mean? What is that doing? And we get to talk through kind of all those things and deviations from like maybe what's healthy blood, which I've never seen anyone with like totally healthy blood. Everyone's got something going on, but it's very, very fascinating.
It is really interesting. I wanted to just circle back to the blood types for a moment. Can you give us maybe a very brief description of what foods are best for what blood type?
Absolutely, yep. So type A's are the best kind of candidate to be vegetarian. Not to say that they all need to be, but if you're going to choose to eat meat, these people have lower stomach acid, so they probably need a bit of help digesting their meats. So like a digestive enzyme with meat heavy meals would be really helpful for them. Type B's and AB's tend to do best with seafood. There's a bit more detail I could get into with those specifics, but essentially they can do meat. It's not like ideal to have a lot of red meat for them. Seafood is ideal. Eggs are good. And then the type O's are kind of the meat lovers, high protein meats, and they don't do well with legumes or grains or dairy.
Well, that's very interesting. And who would have thought that your blood type can tell you how to interact with your diet and have a little more success with that? So could you describe maybe foods that just with a broad spectrum could impact one's metabolism in a positive way?
Yeah, I think protein is probably the most important for positive impact, and then also just being aware of the things that are negatively impacting and trying to mitigate those a little bit, like saturated fats, excess carbs, and just processed foods. would definitely affect the metabolism. So kind of whole foods in general, whether it's a protein source, a carb source, a fat source, they're all going to help your metabolism. We need all those things. Some people, I mean, I know, like, for example, keto is kind of all the rage, and that works for some people, like especially men. I would say that would be a good way to kind of reset your metabolism. I'm not a huge fan of it for women, especially long term, just because we need carbs for your cycle and your hormones, and it really has some detrimental effects when they don't do that. But I would say focusing on protein, whether you're going to do keto or not, is a really good way to kind of, I don't know, be mindful of your metabolism, hopefully positively affect it, like you said.
That makes sense. So are there foods that maybe would slow our metabolism down? And would you have with this kind of foods that we could avoid?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit. So, like, kind of bad fats. We really want good fats, olives, nuts, seeds, avocados, coconuts. But the fats like potato chips, fried foods, all that kind of junk will definitely affect your metabolism for the worse. And then processed foods as well, like a lot of those boxed things. It's just, not quite as easy for your body to metabolize and use as energy. It's not a quality energy source, so you wouldn't feel positive effects from those things for sure.
Right, that makes sense. I know some of my friends are on the carnivore diet now. I guess maybe that is an amped up version of keto. But let's switch gears a little bit to gut health. Can you give us a short description of what gut health means?
Wow, yeah. Well, gut health means essentially what it sounds like, having a healthy gut. Now, I think we want flourishing bacteria. That's kind of in essence, what we talk about with gut health is your bacteria in balance. So everyone has bacteria. It's not bad. We have good bacteria that are working for us. It's more a matter of balance. So I think with these things we talked about in terms of diet, that can really affect the balance of bacteria in your gut. So when you have the bad bacteria kind of elevated and the good bacteria lowered, your gut health, like your digestion is off. That can affect your skin, your mental health, your energy, your sleep. And so that would be good. A marker of that is healthy poops. So that's kind of something that I like to work on with clients is like, I always say it's not weird to talk about poop. That's kind of what we do here. How are you pooping? And we want to get people eliminating properly multiple times per day. And that's a good marker for gut health.
Yes, that is excellent. And I realize that, it can be, someone might be surprised to hear that, but definitely color and shape and amount during the day they're such important indicators for us. Are there foods that you would recommend for improving and maybe maintaining one's gut health?
Yeah. Again, to that everybody's different. So that's where the live blood cell analysis comes really handy, because you see these programs online that are like, here's a gut health program, eat these, don't eat these. And it might not work for everyone. And so I think it's very individualized, but there are some basic guidelines like anyone could probably merit from implementing. First, I would just eliminate things that are harming. So that would be highly inflammatory foods, usually like corn, soy, conventional dairy. If you can get your hands on some raw dairy, if you don't live in Canada, then that's cool, but we can't really get that here. Gluten is one for people. And again, kind of in this part of the world, I think it has a lot more to do with how it's being produced, grain products, for example. But for most people, they would benefit from eliminating gluten, dairy, corn, soy, some people eggs for a little while, even to reset your gut so that it's not in a hyper-inflamed state. Including foods like you mentioned, I would say lots of fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso would be kind of my one exception to soy. That type of thing, sourdough, like if you're doing gluten, or you could do gluten-free sourdough. And then bone broth we talked about last time is incredibly healing for your gut. Actually helps to repair any like minor kind of holes in your gut, so that's really, really helpful in gut healing. And then again, just fresh fruits and vegetables, they can go a long way.
So in thinking of our bodies, there is that body-mind connection. Do you think there's a spiritual side to connecting with our health?
Absolutely. I really don't think that you can even separate them. I'm thinking of this meme I saw on Instagram, which was like best Christian memes or something. It's just silly, and it was like this youth group like saying, "God bless this meal and make it nourishing to our bodies," and it's like a Big Mac and fries. And I find it quite funny because, in some ways, I think that's kind of true. In two ways, I guess. Number one, we do eat a lot of crap, and then we tend to ask God to bless it. And I don't know that that's always like wise. But then the other side is like sometimes you're in a situation where you have to eat something unideal, whether it's out of courtesy for being hosted or you're traveling or whatnot. And we really can trust that like there's a spiritual side to it. And so we could pray that it will be nourishing to our bodies, and you might find that it doesn't affect you in the same way as if you didn't. So I definitely do think there is, and maybe not only like a spiritual connection to God in that way, but also there's a connection. I wouldn't maybe say it's spiritual, but to like farmers that produced your food. So often, like before a meal, we'll say grace and we'll thank God for all the people that were involved in getting this meal on our plate, from the grocery store to the farmers market to the farmers. So yeah, anyway, I think it's really, really impossible to separate.
Amen to that. Josie, how can our viewers get in touch with you for more information?
Yeah, so you can visit my website. It's rootsandfruitswellness.com. I'm on social media, Instagram and Facebook. You can email me. All that info would be on all three of those places.
That's great. Nutrition consultant Josie Bosgra, thank you so much for joining us today from your office in Lethbridge.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. And for all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Michael Clausen. Thanks for watching.